The morning sun cast long shadows across Michael Everett's meticulously maintained lawn as he adjusted the final sprinkler head. At 52, with salt and pepper hair and laugh lines that deepened when he smiled, Michael had developed a passionate relationship with his yard after his divorce 3 years ago. What had begun as a distraction had evolved into an obsession, each blade of grass, each flowering shrub, a testament to his dedication and newfound purpose. "Perfect," he murmured, stepping back to admire the gentle arc of water that would keep his prized hydrangeas hydrated through the summer heat. This small corner of Oakwood Heights, with its tree-lined streets and 1960s ranch-style homes, had been Michael's sanctuary since Carol had packed her things and moved to Colorado with her yoga instructor. The sprinklers ran on a carefully calculated schedule, 6:15 to 6:45 a.m., 3 days a week. Early enough not to inconvenience neighbors heading to work, but late enough that he could enjoy watching the morning light fracture through the water droplets while sipping his first cup of coffee. A simple pleasure that had become something of a ritual. Michael was adjusting the pressure valve when he felt it, that distinctive prickling sensation of being watched. He glanced up to see a woman standing at the edge of his property, arms crossed tightly over her chest, lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. Though they had never formally met, he recognized her immediately. Diane Wilcox from 4 houses down, the self-appointed neighborhood watchdog whose reputation preceded her. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice carrying across the lawn with practiced authority. "Do you have any idea how much water you're wasting?" Michael straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Good morning to you, too," he replied, forcing a polite smile. "I don't believe we've officially met. I'm Michael." Diane Wilcox didn't extend her hand. Instead, she took 3 deliberate steps onto his property, designer sunglasses perched atop her immaculate blonde bob. "Your sprinklers are hitting the sidewalk," she stated, pointing accusingly at a small puddle. "That's against the HOA regulations, Section 4, Paragraph 12. Not to mention it's wasteful during a drought." Michael's smile faltered. There hadn't been a drought warning issued in their county for over 3 years. "I appreciate your concern, but I've calibrated these myself. They're high-efficiency heads, and I've timed them specifically to minimize." "I've documented it," she interrupted, producing her phone and swiping to reveal several close-up photos of water droplets on concrete. 3 separate occasions this week alone. "I'm on the Homeowners Association board now, and we're cracking down on water waste and sidewalk hazards." A dull ache began to form behind Michael's left eye. "Look, Mrs. Wilcox," she corrected sharply. "Mrs. Wilcox," he continued evenly, "I've lived here for 15 years without a single complaint. If you'd like to discuss this reasonably, perhaps over coffee." "I don't have time for coffee," she snapped. "I've already submitted a formal complaint. You'll receive notice by the end of the week. Correct the issue or face fines." With that, she pivoted on her heel and marched down the sidewalk, pausing only to photograph another neighbor's recycling bin that had been left out past collection day. Michael stood motionless, the gentle hiss of his sprinklers suddenly grating against his ears. The morning's tranquility had evaporated, leaving behind an uncomfortable heat that had nothing to do with the rising sun. That evening, the certified letter arrived, his first official HOA violation notice in 15 years. As he read through the cold, bureaucratic language threatening escalating fines for non-compliance, something shifted inside Michael. It wasn't just anger at the intrusion or frustration at the pettiness. It was something more profound, a realization that his sanctuary had been invaded, his simple pleasures deemed offensive. He set the letter down on his kitchen counter and walked to the window, gazing out at his beloved yard now bathed in twilight. The divorce had taken much from him, his confidence, half his retirement savings, and his sense of partnership. But this yard, this small patch of earth, had been his recovery, his canvas, his triumph. Michael picked up his tablet and opened a browser. What had begun as an idle search, creative landscaping ideas, soon shifted to something more specific: water features for front yards. By midnight, surrounded by empty coffee mugs and pages of notes, his initial indignation had transformed into something else entirely: inspiration. If Karen, no, Diane, wanted to talk about water, he would give her something to talk about. Michael Everett's dining room table had disappeared beneath a sprawl of landscaping magazines, printouts of water feature designs, and sketches on graph paper. 2 weeks had passed since Diane Wilcox's intrusion, and in that time, his initial spark of defiance had grown into a carefully structured plan. His reading glasses perched precariously on the end of his nose as he leaned over his latest blueprint, a red pencil clutched in his calloused fingers. "Too subtle," he muttered, crossing out yet another modest design. He wasn't looking for subtle anymore. His phone chimed with a text from his daughter, Jessica. "How's it going, Dad? Still fighting with the HOA? Michael smiled. At 28, Jessica had inherited both his stubbornness and his disdain for petty authority. She'd been his sounding board throughout this escalating situation, encouraging what she called his righteous rebellion. Planning stage, she texted back, meeting the contractor tomorrow. The response was immediate: go big or go home. Michael chuckled and turned back to his designs. Jessica was right. If he was going to do this, he needed to commit fully. His eyes fell on the most ambitious sketch he'd drawn: a cascading natural stone waterfall nearly 6 feet tall with recirculating pumps that would send water tumbling over artfully arranged boulders into a small pond lined with water lilies and decorative grasses. It would be tasteful, elegant even. But most importantly, it would be impossible to miss from Diane Wilcox's daily power walking route. The next morning, Michael sat across from Pete Salazar, owner of Oasis Landscaping. Pete, a burly man with sun-weathered skin and dirt permanently embedded under his fingernails, whistled low as he reviewed Michael's sketch. "This is ambitious for a front yard," Pete said, looking up. "Usually, people want this kind of showcase feature in the back where they can enjoy it privately." "I'm not most people," Michael replied with a thin smile. "And privacy isn't exactly what I'm going for." Pete's eyes crinkled with understanding. "HOA troubles. You could say that." "Say no more," Pete tapped the paper. "I've been in this business 25 years. Half my custom jobs come from folks tired of being told what to do with their own property." He pulled out a tablet and began making notes. "We need to bring in specialty boulders, install a commercial-grade pump system, run electrical. It's not going to be cheap." Michael thought of his divorce settlement, the money he'd been saving for a trip to Europe that he never quite got around to planning. "I've got the budget. What I need to know is, can you make it completely HOA compliant?" Pete's smile widened. "Oh, we can make it bulletproof. I've done my homework on Oakwood Heights regulations. There's nothing in your covenants against water features, provided they're professionally installed and maintained. I'll handle all the permits, get everything signed off by the city." He leaned forward conspiratorially. "Between you and me, I've had run-ins with your Mrs. Wilcox before. Did some work for the Hendersons on Cherry Lane last year. Woman tried to shut down our project 3 times. And the Hendersons now have the most beautiful Japanese-inspired garden in the county, complete with a koi pond that Mrs. Wilcox has to walk past every day." For the first time since receiving the violation notice, Michael felt a genuine sense of optimism. "How soon can you start?" "I can have a crew here Monday. 6 weeks from concept to completion, barring any interference." Michael spent the weekend preparing his yard, marking sprinkler lines and removing the hydrangeas that would need to be relocated. He was carefully digging up the last bush when a shadow fell across him. "Mr. Everett," Diane Wilcox's voice cut through the peaceful Saturday morning. "I see you're finally addressing the sprinkler situation." Michael straightened slowly, brushing dirt from his hands. "Good morning, Mrs. Wilcox. Beautiful day, isn't it?" Her eyes narrowed suspiciously. "What exactly are you doing to your front yard?" "Landscaping project," he said vaguely, gesturing to the marked-off area. "Just some improvements." "You filed the proper paperwork with the HOA Beautification Committee, I assume? Any structural changes to front-facing landscapes must be approved in advance." Michael reached into his back pocket and produced a folded document. "Actually, I have. Everything's in order. The committee approved it yesterday." He didn't mention that his next-door neighbor, Tom Chen, was on the committee and had fast-tracked the approval after hearing about Diane's sprinkler crusade. Diane snatched the paper, scanning it with increasing agitation. "This approval is very general. It doesn't specify what kind of water feature you're installing." "The committee didn't request additional details," Michael replied, unable to keep a note of satisfaction from his voice. "But I'd be happy to show you the designs if you'd like to come back Monday when my contractor arrives." Diane thrust the paper back at him. "That won't be necessary. Just know that I'll be watching this project very carefully, Mr. Everett." Very carefully indeed. As she stalked away, Michael returned to his digging with renewed vigor. Monday couldn't come soon enough. When the Oasis landscaping trucks pulled up at dawn on Monday, Michael was already waiting on his porch with a thermos of coffee and a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. As Pete's crew began unloading equipment and the first massive boulders arrived on a flat truck, neighbors emerged from their homes, curious about the commotion. Michael caught sight of Diane Wilcox standing at the edge of her driveway, phone in hand, no doubt documenting every moment. He raised his coffee mug in a cheerful salute. The battle lines had been drawn, and for once, Michael was actually looking forward to the fight. By the end of the first week, Michael Everett's front yard had been transformed into what resembled an archaeological excavation. A 6-foot-deep pit dominated the space where his prized hydrangeas once stood, surrounded by piles of dirt and an impressive collection of boulders in varying sizes and shapes. The neighborhood children had taken to gathering on the sidewalk after school, watching in fascination as Pete's crew maneuvered the stones into place with a small crane. "Is it going to be like Niagara Falls?" asked 8-year-old Tyler from next door, his eyes wide with wonder. "Not quite that big," Michael replied with a laugh. handing the boy a juice box from the cooler he started keeping on his porch for the crew and spectators alike. But it'll be pretty spectacular. Mom says Mrs. Wilcox is having a cow about it, Tyler confided, slurping his juice. She's called a special HOA meeting for tomorrow night. Michael's smile tightened slightly. Is that right? Well, that should be interesting. The HOA meeting was held in the community center, a modest building that typically hosted yoga classes and book clubs. Tonight, however, the atmosphere crackled with tension as Michael slipped into a seat in the back row. Nearly half the neighborhood had turned out, an unprecedented attendance for a routine meeting. Diane Wilcox stood at the podium, her presentation already in progress. And as you can clearly see from these photos, she continued, clicking through a slideshow of Michael's construction site. This is not a minor landscaping project. This is a massive disruption to the aesthetic harmony of our community. From his position, Michael could see heads nodding in agreement, but also several neighbors rolling their eyes or exchanging amused glances. Oakwood Heights was divided, and he hadn't even turned on a single drop of water yet. Furthermore, Diane pressed on, there are serious safety and liability concerns. Standing water attracts mosquitoes and poses a drowning hazard for neighborhood children. At this, Michael couldn't remain silent. He stood up, raising his hand politely. If I may address these concerns, the HOA president, a retired accountant named Gerald, who looked perpetually exhausted by his volunteer position, nodded gratefully. Yes, please, Mr. Everett, your response? Michael made his way to the front, nodding cordially to neighbors as he passed. He turned to face the room, surprised to find himself completely calm. First, I want to thank everyone for their interest in my landscaping project, he began. I understand change can be concerning, especially in a neighborhood as beautiful as ours. But I can assure you that this water feature is being installed by Oasis Landscaping, who have done work for many of you. He nodded towards several homeowners who had used Pete's services in the past. It includes a state-of-the-art filtration system that prevents mosquito breeding and algae growth. The pond depth is less than 18 inches, which is within safety guidelines, and it will be surrounded by natural stone barriers. He clicked to the next slide in Diane's presentation, which showed the mess of construction. And yes, it looks chaotic now. Construction always does. But if I may. Michael pulled out his tablet and opened his own presentation, which Pete had helped him prepare. The room murmured appreciatively as he displayed the rendered images of the completed project, a natural-looking waterfall cascading over artfully arranged boulders surrounded by native plants and subtle landscape lighting. This is what we're working toward, he explained, a water-efficient, professionally designed feature that will add value to our community. And he added, unable to resist the pointed remark, unlike sprinklers, it won't spray a single drop onto the sidewalk. A ripple of laughter spread through the room. Even Gerald cracked a smile. All permits are in order, Michael continued. The project has been approved by the city's water department and the HOA beautification committee. He held up the documentation. I've followed every regulation to the letter. Diane, flushed with anger, stepped forward. The approval was for a water feature. This, she gestured wildly at the rendering. It's not what the committee envisioned. It's excessive. It's ostentatious. It's beautiful, interrupted Maggie Thompson, an elderly woman from down the street. I think it's going to be lovely, Michael. Lord knows we could use something interesting on this block. I agree, said another neighbor. And it's his property, for heaven's sake. Gerald cleared his throat. Unless Mrs. Wilcox can cite a specific covenant violation, I believe Mr. Everett is within his rights to proceed with the approved project. The meeting dissolved into animated discussion, with Michael finding himself surrounded by neighbors asking questions about his waterfall, many expressing their support. By the time he made it home, he had 7 requests for Pete's business card and an invitation to join the Neighborhood Watch Committee, an irony that wasn't lost on him. The next morning, Michael was adding coffee grounds to his compost bin when a black SUV pulled up in front of his house. A woman in a tailored suit emerged, clipboard in hand, and approached with purpose. Mr. Everett, I'm Barbara Chen from the city's Water Conservation Department. We've received several complaints about potential water waste at this address. Michael sighed. Let me guess, from Mrs. Wilcox. Barbara's professional expression cracked slightly. We don't disclose complainants, but yes. I'm required to investigate all reports, but between us, she calls our office weekly about something or other. Would you like to see the project plans? Michael offered. The water feature uses a closed recirculation system. It actually consumes less water than the sprinklers I was using previously. As he walked Barbara through the specifications, Pete's crew arrived to begin installing the waterproofing layer in the excavation. The water conservation officer seemed impressed with the thoroughness of the design, making notes on her clipboard. Everything seems to be in compliance, she concluded, looking up from her inspection. Actually, this is one of the more environmentally conscious water features I've seen in a residential setting. The use of native plants around the perimeter is a nice touch. Michael felt a weight lift from his shoulders. So we're good to proceed? Absolutely. In fact, Barbara hesitated, then lowered her voice. We're putting together a sustainable landscaping tour for Earth Day next month. Would you consider including your yard once it's completed? It could be a good example of responsible water usage. The irony was delicious. I'd be delighted, Michael replied, shaking her hand. As Barbara drove away, Michael noticed Diane Wilcox standing in her driveway, phone pressed to her ear, watching the exchange with thinly veiled frustration. He waved cheerfully, then turned his attention back to Pete, who was explaining the pump system he would begin installing the following day. The project was proceeding exactly as planned, perhaps even better. What had begun as a petty act of rebellion was evolving into something Michael genuinely took pride in. For the first time since Carol had left, he felt a sense of community forming around him. Neighbors who had never spoken to him before stopped by daily to check on the progress, bringing cookies and cold drinks for the workers. That evening, as he sat on his porch, watching the sunset bathe the construction site in golden light, Michael's phone pinged with a text from Jessica. "How's Operation Waterworks going? Driven Karen crazy yet?" Michael smiled as he typed his response. Better than expected. The whole neighborhood is watching now. But you know what's strange? I'm starting to care less about annoying her and more about creating something beautiful. Character development, Dad, came Jessica's reply. I'm proud of you. Can't wait to see it when I visit next month. Michael looked out at what would soon be his waterfall, feeling a surprising sense of gratitude toward Diane Wilcox. Without her interference, he might never have discovered this new passion or the unexpected community that came with it. 3 weeks into the project, Michael's front yard had undergone a remarkable transformation. The jagged hole had evolved into a gracefully contoured pond, its edges lined with smooth river rocks and native grasses. The waterfall structure was taking shape, an impressive arrangement of granite boulders creating natural-looking tiers that would soon channel cascading water. Pete's crew worked with the precision of artists, adjusting each stone's position by mere inches to achieve the perfect flow pattern. We'll start testing the pumps tomorrow, Pete announced as he and Michael reviewed the day's progress. By the weekend, you'll have water running. Ahead of schedule? Michael asked, surprised. Pete grinned. Let's just say the crew's been putting in some extra effort. They've never had so many people bringing them homemade cookies and lemonade before. He gestured toward the small crowd of neighbors who had gathered for what had become a daily ritual, watching the waterfall take shape. The impromptu social hour had become Michael's favorite part of the day. He learned more about his neighbors in 3 weeks than he had in 15 years. There was Tom from across the street, recently retired and full of stories about his days as a commercial pilot. Margaret, the elementary school teacher, who brought her class by on a field trip to learn about water ecosystems in urban environments. Even Mrs. Abernathy, who had to be pushing 90, made her way over each afternoon with her walker to supervise the proceedings. Only one neighbor remained conspicuously absent from these gatherings. Diane Wilcox had taken to altering her power walking route to avoid passing Michael's house, though he occasionally caught glimpses of her watching from a distance, phone in hand. She's documenting every nail we drive, Pete commented, noticing Michael's gaze. Got 3 different inspectors out here last week alone. City's starting to get annoyed with her. Michael frowned. I almost feel bad for her. She's making herself miserable over this. Trust me, she was miserable long before your waterfall came along, Pete replied, gathering his tools. Some people just can't stand others doing things differently than they would. That evening, Michael sat on his porch with a glass of wine, enjoying the unseasonably warm spring night. His phone rang, Jessica calling for her weekly update. How's it going, Dad? Is Waterfall Gate still the talk of the town? Michael chuckled. We test the pumps tomorrow. It's turning out even better than I hoped. But honestly, I'm starting to feel like the whole revenge aspect is, I don't know, petty. Well, no, Jessica laughed. It was petty from the start. That's what made it so awesome. But if you're enjoying it for other reasons now, that's even better. I just wish. Michael paused as a car pulled up in front of his house. Through the gathering dusk, he recognized Diane Wilcox's black SUV. Jess, I've got to go. Situation developing. Ooh, drama. Call me back with details. Michael pocketed his phone and stood as Diane approached his porch, her posture rigid with determination. She'd clearly come directly from work, still dressed in a tailored business suit, her blonde bob perfectly in place despite the long day. Mrs. Wilcox, he greeted her cautiously. This is a surprise. Mr. Everett. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, arms crossed defensively. I think it's time we had a conversation. Michael gestured to the empty chair beside him. Would you care to sit? I was just having a glass of wine. I could get another if you'd like to join me. Diane hesitated, clearly thrown by the invitation. After a moment's consideration, she climbed the steps and perched on the edge of the chair. No wine, thank you. An awkward silence settled between them. Michael waited, letting her gather her thoughts. My husband left me 6 months ago, she finally said, her voice so quiet Michael almost missed it. Of all the things he'd expected her to say, this wasn't even on the list. I'm sorry to hear that. I know how difficult divorce can be. Diane's gaze remained fixed on the Waterfall construction site. 26 years of marriage, and he left for his dental hygienist. 24 years old. Has a butterfly tattoo on her ankle. She let out a brittle laugh. How cliché is that? Michael wasn't sure how to respond, so he simply nodded sympathetically. The day he moved out, she continued, I looked around our perfectly maintained house, our perfectly maintained yard, our perfectly maintained life, and realized none of it had mattered. I'd spent decades enforcing rules at home, at work, in the neighborhood. And for what? To end up alone anyway. She turned to face Michael directly. Do you know why I've been so involved with the HOA? I had assumed you genuinely cared about property values and neighborhood aesthetics, Michael replied diplomatically. Control, Diane said flatly. When everything else in my life was falling apart, at least I could control this one small corner of the world. Make sure the garbage cans weren't visible from the street. Ensure holiday decorations came down promptly. Regulate the height of grass. Her voice broke slightly. It's pathetic, isn't it? Michael refilled his wine glass, considering his words carefully. I think we all find different ways to cope with loss. After my divorce, I became obsessed with my yard. Not the rules of it, but the living, growing things. It gave me purpose when I felt purposeless. Diane nodded slowly. Your waterfall. It's not what I would have chosen. It's bold, it's different. But, she hesitated, seeming to struggle with the admission, it's also rather magnificent. Thank you, Michael said, genuinely surprised. That means a lot coming from you. I came here tonight to tell you that I'm withdrawing my complaints with the city and the HOA, Diane said, straightening in her chair, and to apologize for my behavior. It was excessive. Michael studied her face in the fading light, seeing for the first time the exhaustion behind her carefully applied makeup, the sadness in her eyes that mirrored what he'd seen in his own mirror not so long ago. Apology accepted, he said simply. And if you're free this weekend. By mid-June, Michael's waterfall had become something of a local landmark. Unforeseen consequences rippled outward from his act of defiance, transforming not just his yard, but the entire neighborhood in subtle, unexpected ways. The Earth Day Sustainable Landscaping Tour had been a resounding success, with over 200 people from across the county visiting to see Michael's waterfall. Local news coverage followed, featuring a beaming Michael explaining the water recirculation system while children played nearby. The Oakwood Heights HOA, recognizing good publicity when they saw it, quickly claimed the waterfall as evidence of their progressive approach to sustainable landscaping initiatives, a phrase that made Michael snort with laughter when he read it in their newsletter. What surprised him most was how the waterfall had changed the social ecosystem of Oakwood Heights. The sound of flowing water created a natural gathering spot, drawing neighbors outside in the evenings. Conversations happened organically as people paused to watch the play of light on water. Children who had previously been confined to backyards or the community playground now congregated around Michael's pond, catching tadpoles and naming the goldfish he introduced to the ecosystem. You've created a modern village well, observed Tom Chen one evening as they watched a group of neighbors chatting beside the waterfall, wine glasses in hand. In ancient times, the well was where everyone exchanged news, settled disputes, found community. Michael had never thought of it that way, but Tom was right. The waterfall had become neutral ground, a place where neighbors connected without the pretense of formal invitations or planned events. The most remarkable transformation, however, was happening at 1482 Oakwood Drive. Diane Wilcox's immaculately maintained colonial, with its ruler-straight hedges and symmetrical flower beds. Michael first noticed the change when a delivery truck pulled up one Saturday morning, unloading several large ceramic planters in vibrant blues and greens, a stark departure from Diane's usual restrained palette. Over the following weeks, more changes appeared. The regimented rows of identical red begonias were replaced with an exuberant mix of wildflowers. A handcrafted wooden bench appeared beneath the maple tree. Solar-powered lanterns lined the winding path to her front door, which had been painted a bold teal. Most shocking of all was the day Michael drove past and saw Diane on her hands and knees in the dirt, wearing faded jeans and a Stanford alumni t-shirt, planting sunflowers along her fence line. Her perfectly coiffed bob was tucked under a wide-brimmed straw hat, and she was laughing at something Margaret's 7-year-old daughter was saying as they worked side by side. Michael slowed his car, waving as he passed. Diane straightened, wiping her hands on her jeans, and returned the wave with unexpected warmth. The next morning, Michael was enjoying his coffee beside the waterfall when Diane approached, carrying a small pot of purple flowering plants. Watermint, she explained, setting it down next to him. For the pond's edge, they'll spread naturally and help oxygenate the water. Plus, it smells divine when you brush against it. Thank you, Michael said, genuinely touched by the thoughtful gift. Your garden is looking amazing, by the way. Quite a change. Diane's smile held a touch of self-deprecation. Let's just say I've been rethinking some things. Life's too short for perfectly straight lines. She gestured to her soil-stained clothes. And apparently, I love gardening. Who knew? 26 years of marriage, and I never stepped off the patio while Raymond handled the yard. Would you like some coffee? Michael offered, gesturing to the chair beside him. I have a thermos. To his surprise, she nodded and settled into the seat. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, watching a hummingbird dart among the flowering plants surrounding the waterfall. I've been approached about joining the beautification committee, Diane said eventually. They want me to help revise the landscaping guidelines, make them more flexible. Michael raised an eyebrow. And how do you feel about that? Terrified, she admitted with a small laugh. But also ready. I've spent so long being the person who enforces rules. It might be interesting to be the one who helps change them. I think you'd be perfect for it, Michael said, surprised to realize he meant it. You understand both sides now. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Jessica, who pulled into Michael's driveway with a screech of tires, her typical dramatic entrance. She bounded up the path, then stopped short at the sight of Diane sitting with her father. You must be Jessica, Diane said, rising to her feet. Your father talks about you all the time. Jessica shot Michael a questioning look. And you're Diane Wilcox, she supplied, extending her hand. I believe you know me as Karen. Jessica's mouth fell open, then closed again. She glanced at the water mint, at the relaxed posture of her father, at Diane's dirt-stained jeans. Okay, she said, slowly accepting the handshake. I feel like I've missed a few chapters here. Why don't you join us? Michael suggested, hiding his amusement. Diane was just telling me about her plans for the beautification committee. As Jessica settled in, visibly bewildered by this unexpected turn of events, Michael felt a surge of contentment. His waterfall burbled peacefully in the background, providing the perfect soundtrack to this unlikely gathering. That evening, after Diane had gone home and Jessica had peppered him with incredulous questions, seriously, Dad, are you and Karen friends now? Michael sat alone by his waterfall, reflecting on the strange journey of the past few months. What had begun as an act of petty revenge had evolved into something far more meaningful. He'd set out to make a statement to assert his autonomy against what he perceived as unreasonable control. Instead, he created a space that brought people together, that fostered connection rather than division. And somewhere along the way, he discovered something important about himself. After Carol left, he retreated into his private world, tending his yard in solitude, finding comfort in the predictability of plants. The Waterfall project had forced him out of that isolation, reminding him how much he enjoyed being part of a community. The water flowed over the rocks, finding its natural path just as he was finding his. Michael smiled at the metaphor, a bit obvious, perhaps, but no less true for its simplicity. From across the street, the sound of children's laughter drifted over. Tom Chen had been inspired to install a basketball hoop in his driveway, and now neighborhood kids gathered there most evenings. Down the block, Margaret was organizing a community vegetable garden in what had previously been an unused corner lot. Change was rippling outward, one small disruption at a time. Michael's phone buzzed with a text from Pete Salazar. How is the